The crystal stemware caught the candlelight as I set down my fork, the clink against the bone china echoing in the sudden silence. My daughter-in-law Betsy's laughter still hung in the air like smoke from a extinguished candle, acrid and lingering. Around the mahogany table that had hosted 4 decades of family celebrations, 6 pairs of eyes avoided mine, while Betsy Taylor, how fitting that surname had become, smiled with the satisfaction of a predator who'd just delivered the killing blow. "We'll pick her nursing home based on Wi-Fi speed," she'd said, her voice bright with manufactured cheer. "At least Mom will be able to FaceTime us from her wheelchair." The others had laughed. My son William, my youngest Kenneth, even my daughter-in-law Nancy from Kenneth's side had giggled behind her wineglass. Only my granddaughter Aurora had looked uncomfortable, her 19-year-old face flushed with embarrassment as she stared at her untouched dessert. I was 73 years old, not 93. I walked 5 miles every morning. I still drove my own car, managed my own finances, and had more energy than most people half my age. But here I sat, being discussed like a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. "Mother, you know Betsy was just joking," William said, his voice carrying that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. At 45, my eldest son had inherited his father's jawline, but none of his backbone. "We're just concerned about you rattling around in this big house all alone." Rattling around, as if I were some dried pea in an empty pod. The house wasn't too big. It was perfect. Richard and I had chosen it 38 years ago when William was 7 and Kenneth was 5, specifically because it had room for a growing family and space for us to grow old together. The wraparound porch where we'd sipped morning coffee, the kitchen where I'd taught both boys to make pancakes, the garden where Richard had proposed to me a second time on our 20th anniversary, just because he felt like it. But Richard had been gone for 3 years now, and apparently, that meant I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. "The maintenance alone must be killing you," Kenneth added, cutting into his tiramisu with surgical precision. At 43, he'd inherited his father's analytical mind, but had somehow missed the empathy gene entirely. "Property taxes, utilities, upkeep, it's not practical for a woman your age." A woman your age. The phrase made my teeth ache. "I manage just fine," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I've been managing the household finances longer than you've been alive." "That's exactly the problem," Betsy interjected, leaning forward with false concern etched across her surgically enhanced features. "You're from a different generation, Mom. Financial planning is so much more complex now. We just want to make sure you're protected." Protected. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. For the past 2 years, ever since Richard's funeral, they'd been circling like vultures. Subtle at first, offers to help with my banking, suggestions that I might be more comfortable in a smaller space, conversations about my security in this neighborhood. But tonight, the gloves had come off. "We've been looking at some lovely places," Nancy chimed in, her voice bright with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never had to worry about being warehoused against her will. "Golden Years has an excellent reputation, and they have a waiting list, so we'd need to move quickly." Golden Years. They'd already picked out my cage. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, people I'd given birth to, raised, supported through college and career changes and divorces. I'd been their soft place to land for decades, their unpaid babysitter, their emergency fund, their emotional support system. I'd mortgaged my own dreams to pay for William's business degree, sold my grandmother's jewelry to help Kenneth with his down payment, spent countless nights caring for sick grandchildren while their parents traveled for work. And now, I was the problem to be solved. "I'm curious," I said, my voice carrying across the table like a blade through silk. "Have any of you actually asked me what I want?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Betsy's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. William shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Kenneth set down his fork with a soft click. "Of course we care what you want, Mom," William said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "We just think you might not be seeing the situation clearly." Not seeing clearly, because apparently, at 73, I'd suddenly become incapable of rational thought. I see perfectly clearly, I replied, standing slowly and deliberately. I see that you've made plans for my life without consulting me. I see that you've discussed my finances, my housing, my future, as if I were already incompetent. I see that you think I'm a burden to be managed, rather than a person to be respected. The silence that followed was profound. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. "Mom, you're being dramatic," Kenneth said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I asked, looking directly at Betsy. "Was that a joke about the nursing home? Because I didn't hear anyone laughing when you discussed my financial situation. I didn't hear anyone asking if I'd prefer to stay in my own home. I heard a group of people making decisions about someone who wasn't even consulted." Aurora finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma, You just what, sweetheart?" I asked, my tone gentler for her sake. "You just think I'm too old to know my own mind? You just think I should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity you're willing to leave me?" The words hit their mark. I could see it in their faces, the guilt, the discomfort, the realization that they'd been caught, but it was too late for remorse. "I think," I said, smoothing my napkin and placing it beside my plate, "that dinner is over." I walked to the kitchen, my back straight and my head high, even though my hands were shaking. Behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs, the murmur of voices, the rustle of coats being gathered. They were leaving, probably to continue their conversation about my situation in the safety of their own homes. Let them talk. Let them plan. Let them make their lists and their phone calls and their assumptions. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that I'd been making plans too. In my purse, folded neatly inside my checkbook, was a receipt from Oceanside Realty. 3 months ago, while they thought I was rattling around in my grief, I'd been walking the coastal paths of a small town 2 hours north. I'd found a cottage, modest but perfect, with a view of the endless sea and enough land for a garden. I'd paid cash, using the money from Richard's life insurance policy and the sale of my grandmother's engagement ring. I'd been planning this for longer than they'd been planning to dispose of me. The cottage was mine now, completely, legally, irrevocably mine. And tomorrow, I would begin the process of disappearing from their lives as thoroughly as they'd already erased me from their consideration. From the kitchen window, I watched their taillights disappear down the driveway. The house settled into quiet around me, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of loneliness. It was the profound quiet of a decision made, a bridge burned, a new chapter about to begin. I poured myself a glass of Richard's best wine, the bottle we'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it in a toast to my empty dining room. "To freedom," I whispered, and drank deeply. The taste was perfect. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds as I sat at the breakfast table, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The newspaper lay folded beside me, unread. Instead, I stared at the business card I'd pulled from my wallet. White cardstock with elegant script, Rosa Pratt Kelly, estate planning attorney. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner, and my children had been surprisingly quiet. No phone calls about nursing homes, no unexpected visits to check on me. I wondered if they thought their work was done, that I was quietly accepting my fate while they made their arrangements behind my back. How wrong they were. The cottage, my cottage, was ready. I'd driven there twice since that night, each visit strengthening my resolve. The previous owner, a widow named Ruby Martin, had left it in perfect condition. Hardwood floors that gleamed in the morning sun, a kitchen window that framed the ocean like a painting, and a back porch where I could already imagine hosting the life I'd never dared to live. But buying the cottage was just the beginning. Today, I would set the rest of my plan in motion. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 o'clock. Rosa Pratt Kelly stood on my doorstep, her silver hair pulled back in a neat chignon, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. At 68, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades fighting battles and winning them. "Mrs. Evans," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for calling me." I led her to my study, Richard's old office, really, where I'd spread out the documents like battle plans across his mahogany desk. Bank statements, property deeds, insurance policies, investment portfolios. The financial skeleton of a life lived carefully and saved wisely. I need to restructure everything, I told her without preamble. I want to ensure my assets are protected from family interference, and I want to create a trust that serves my interests, not theirs. Rosa's eyebrows rose slightly. That's quite a comprehensive request. May I ask what prompted this decision? I told her about the dinner, about the nursing home comment, about years of subtle manipulation and condescension. Rosa listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. How much do your children know about your financial situation? She asked when I finished. They think they know everything. William handles my taxes, or thinks he does. Kenneth believes he's been managing my investment portfolio. Betsy has been encouraging me to add her name to my accounts for convenience. And have you? No. The word came out sharp and decisive. I've been letting them think they're indispensable while keeping complete control. They assume I'm too naive to understand modern finance, too fragile to handle complexity. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Rosa smiled, a predator's smile that matched my own. What exactly do you want to accomplish? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I want to disappear from their lives completely. I want them to realize that the woman they planned to warehouse was the source of their security, their emergency fund, their safety net. I want them to understand what they've lost only when it's too late to recover it. That's quite a comprehensive goal. Are you prepared for the consequences? I'm prepared for freedom. For the next 3 hours, Rosa and I dismantled my old life and rebuilt it according to my terms. The house would go on the market immediately. I'd already contacted a realtor who specialized in luxury properties. The proceeds would go into a trust that my children couldn't touch, couldn't contest, couldn't even fully understand until after I was gone. My investment portfolio, worth considerably more than my sons imagined, would be transferred to accounts they'd never heard of. The trust would provide for my needs at the cottage, fund the projects I'd dreamed of, and ensure that my legacy would serve causes I cared about rather than children who'd forgotten to care about me. What about your granddaughter? Rosa asked as we reviewed the final documents. You mentioned she seemed uncomfortable with the family's plans. I paused, thinking of Aurora Young, my daughter-in-law's daughter from her first marriage, whom I'd raised as my own after her father died. At 19, she was caught between loyalty to her mother and genuine affection for me. She's different, I admitted. But she's also young and influenced by her mother. If she reaches out to me genuinely after I've made my move, we'll see. But I won't make exceptions based on hope. Rosa nodded approvingly. Smart. False hope is the enemy of clean breaks. As Rosa packed her briefcase, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished widow my children saw, but the woman who'd built a life, raised a family, and survived loss with dignity intact. There's one more thing, I said as Rosa reached the door. I want to accelerate the timeline. How quickly can we execute this? If you're certain we can have everything in place within 2 weeks. The house can be listed immediately, the trust established by Friday, and the accounts transferred by early next week. Do it. That afternoon, I drove to the cottage. The keys felt substantial in my palm as I unlocked the door and stepped into what would become my new life. The silence here was different from the silence at home. Not empty, but expectant, full of possibility. I walked through each room slowly, already envisioning the changes I'd make. The guest bedrooms would become studios, one for painting, one for writing. The sunroom would be perfect for yoga, with its wall of windows facing the ocean. The kitchen would host dinners for people who valued my presence, not my convenience. And in the back garden, I'd plant vegetables and herbs. I'd learn to cook for one without feeling diminished by the solitude. My phone buzzed with a text from William. Mom, we need to talk about the Golden Years application. They have an opening. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. He could wait. They could all wait. From the cottage's front porch, I could hear the ocean's rhythm, endless, patient, indifferent to human drama. It was the sound of time passing, of tides turning, of changes that couldn't be reversed. I thought about the dinner 3 weeks ago, about Betsy's laughter, about the casual cruelty of planning someone's diminishment while they sat right there. I thought about decades of being taken for granted, of being treated like a resource rather than a person. Tomorrow, I would drive back to town and begin the final phase. The house would be listed, the movers scheduled, the utilities transferred. I would pack only what mattered: photos of Richard, my grandmother's quilts, the books I'd always meant to reread. Everything else could stay for the estate sale. My phone rang. Kenneth this time. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Mom, call me back. We need to discuss the paperwork for Golden Years. Betsy found a great place, and we need to move quickly. We need to move quickly. The irony was perfect. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I sat on the porch steps, watching the colors deepen and fade, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. In 2 weeks, I would be gone. Not dead, not diminished, but simply gone from their lives as completely as they'd already erased me from their consideration. They would arrive at my house to find it empty, to discover that the woman they'd planned to manage had managed them instead. They would learn that their emergency fund had evaporated, that their safety net had been quietly removed, that their assumptions about my helplessness had been the foundation of their own security. And I would be here, in this cottage by the sea, beginning the life I'd never dared to live while I was busy being the person they needed me to be. The ocean whispered its ancient promises, of tides that turned, of storms that passed, of shores that endured long after the waves that shaped them had moved on to other coastlines. I whispered back, soon. 2 weeks. 14 days until I reclaimed my life completely. I could hardly wait to see their faces when they realized what they'd lost. But by then, I would be too far away to care about their shock, their regret, their belated recognition of what they'd thrown away. By then, I would be free. The moving truck pulled away from my house at exactly 3 in the afternoon, taking with it the last remnants of the life I'd built with Richard. I stood in the empty driveway, keys to my former home heavy in my palm, watching the dust settle on 40 years of memories reduced to cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. The house looked smaller somehow, diminished by its emptiness. The realtor's sign swayed gently in the autumn breeze. Sold in bold red letters across the cheerful yellow placard. It had taken exactly 8 days to sell, a record for the neighborhood according to Janet Waters, my realtor. The buyers, a young couple with twin toddlers, had fallen in love with the wraparound porch and the mature oak trees. They saw possibility where my children had seen only burden. My phone had been buzzing constantly for the past week. 17 missed calls from William, 12 from Kenneth, 23 from Betsy. I'd listened to exactly one voicemail, Betsy's voice shrill with panic as she demanded to know why strangers were looking at our house. The possessive pronoun had made me smile. Our house. As if they'd contributed a single mortgage payment in 4 decades. I'd changed my phone number that same day. The cottage felt different when I arrived as its permanent resident. The afternoon light streaming through the kitchen windows seemed brighter, more welcoming. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by boxes labeled in my careful handwriting. Books, study, china, kitchen, photos, bedroom. Each box represented a choice, a decision about what deserved space in my new life. Most of my furniture hadn't made the cut. Richard's recliner, the dining room set where we'd hosted so many holiday meals, the living room sofa where I'd nursed sick children and comforted crying grandchildren, all sold to strangers who would create their own memories with my discarded past. I'd kept only what brought me joy: my grandmother's rocking chair, the kitchen table where Richard and I had shared morning coffee, the bedroom set from our honeymoon suite. Everything else was just weight, anchoring me to obligations I no longer felt. The sound of footsteps on the front porch interrupted my inventory. I froze, my heart hammering. Had they found me already? Had Betsy somehow tracked down my new address? But the knock was gentle, tentative. Through the window, I saw a woman about my age, her silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothes paint-stained and comfortable. She held a covered dish in her hands. "Hello," she said when I opened the door. "I'm Louise Qualls from the Blue House down the path. I saw the moving truck and thought you might be too tired to cook." The kindness in her voice was so unexpected that I nearly cried. When had I last experienced genuine consideration from another person? "I'm Violet," I said, accepting the dish. "Violet Evans. This is incredibly thoughtful." Louise smiled, her face creasing with lines that spoke of decades of easy laughter. "I remember when I moved here after my husband died. The neighbors made all the difference. Would you like some help unpacking? I'm retired, and I have nothing but time." For the next 4 hours, Louise and I worked side by side, transforming the cottage from a house full of boxes into something that felt like home. She had an easy way about her, asking just enough questions to be friendly without prying, offering suggestions without presuming to know my preferences. "You have beautiful taste," she said as we unwrapped my grandmother's china. "These pieces have history." "They do," I agreed, running my fingers over the delicate rose pattern. "My grandmother served Sunday dinners on these plates for 60 years. I always imagined I'd do the same, but life had other plans." I looked at Louise, studying her face. There was something in her eyes, a recognition perhaps of unfinished sentences and redirected dreams. "Something like that," I said. As evening approached, Louise helped me arrange the last of my books on the living room shelves. "There's a group of us who meet every Thursday morning," she said casually. "We call ourselves the Sunrise Walkers. We hike the coastal trails, then have coffee at the marina. You're welcome to join us. I don't want to impose—" "You wouldn't be imposing. We're always looking for fresh perspectives." Louise grinned. "Fair warning, though. We're a rowdy bunch. All widows, all opinionated, all thoroughly done with being polite about things that matter." Something in her tone made me pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're women who've spent decades taking care of everyone else, and we're finally learning to take care of ourselves. We support each other's choices, even when they're difficult ones." Louise's eyes met mine with an intensity that suggested she understood more than she was saying. "Sometimes," she continued, "the bravest thing a woman can do is walk away from people who've forgotten her worth." The words hit me like a physical blow. How could she possibly know? "I saw the out-of-state plates on the cars that came by yesterday," Louise said gently, "and I heard the shouting when they realized the house was empty. Small town, thin walls, word travels." My face burned with embarrassment. "They found me. They found the house. But they didn't find you, did they? You weren't here." I shook my head. I'd been at the realtor's office, signing the final papers for the house sale, when William and Kenneth had driven up to find their childhood home gutted and empty. I'd watched from Janet's window as they'd stood in the driveway, their faces cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. "Good for you," Louise said firmly. "Whatever they did to drive you away, good for you for having the courage to leave. You don't even know what happened. I don't need to know the details. I know the look in your eyes when you talk about them, like you're waiting for the next blow. I know the way you flinch when your phone buzzes. I know the relief in your voice when you talk about this house being yours." Louise's voice was gentle but steely. "I know because I've been there." She sat down on my grandmother's rocking chair, looking suddenly older, more fragile. "My daughter-in-law convinced my son that I was becoming a burden, said I was too old to live alone, too confused to manage my affairs. She had me convinced I was losing my mind. What happened? I gave them power of attorney. Let them help me with my finances. Within 6 months, they'd moved me into a senior living facility and were selling my house to pay for my care. Care I didn't need, in a place I didn't want to be. My breath caught. How did you get out? I got angry. Really, truly angry for the first time in my life. I hired a lawyer, proved I was completely competent, and took back control of my money. Bought this house with what they hadn't managed to steal." Louise's smile was sharp as a blade. "They haven't spoken to me since. Do you regret it?" "Every single day," Louise said, and my heart sank. Then she grinned. "I regret waiting so long to do it." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the ocean. Louise had given me something I hadn't expected: validation. Proof that my choice wasn't cruel or selfish, but necessary. "The walking group," I said eventually. "Are they all—" Escapees? Survivors? Women who chose themselves over family expectations? Louise nodded. Every single one of us. We're a chosen family now, bound by mutual respect instead of obligation. My phone, my new phone, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My stomach clenched until I read it. Welcome to the neighborhood. This is Donna from the Red Cottage. Louise mentioned you moved in today. We're having wine on my deck tomorrow at sunset if you'd like to join us. She works fast, I said, showing Louise the message. We all do. When you've wasted decades being polite to people who don't appreciate it, you learn to recognize kindred spirits quickly. As Louise prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Your family, will they keep looking for you? Probably, at least until they realize I'm not coming back. And if they do find you? I thought about the question, about the panic in Betsy's voice, about the shock on my sons' faces when they'd realized their safety net had vanished. Then they'll discover that I'm not the helpless woman they thought they were managing. Louise nodded approvingly. Good, because we protect our own here, and you're one of us now. After she left, I sat on my back porch, listening to the ocean's eternal conversation with the shore. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message. This time it was from someone named Maxine Mikulski. Louise says you're a reader. I run a book club. We're reading books by women who reinvented themselves after 60. Sound interesting? I typed back. Very interesting. When do we meet? The response came immediately. Tomorrow night. Fair warning, we drink wine and speak our minds. Hope you're ready for both. I was ready for both. I was ready for everything. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. My old life was gone, sold to strangers and reduced to memories. My children had lost their emergency fund, their safety net, their convenient scapegoat. They would have to face their own choices, their own consequences, their own futures without my silent support. And I would be here, surrounded by women who understood that sometimes love means letting go, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is the consequences of their own actions. The ocean whispered its approval, and I whispered back, thank you. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new possibilities, new chances to choose joy over obligation. But tonight, I was home. 3 months into my new life, I was leading a sunrise yoga session on the beach when I saw the familiar silhouette walking toward our group. Aurora Young picked her way carefully across the sand, her college sweatshirt oversized and wrinkled, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved with the uncertain gait of someone who'd been crying. I maintained my warrior pose, breathing steadily as she approached. Around me, the other women, Louise, Donna Pelosi, Maxine Mikulski, and 3 newer members of our growing circle, continued their morning practice. We'd become something neither of us had expected, a thriving wellness community for women reclaiming their lives. Grandma Violet? Aurora's voice cracked slightly. I completed the sequence before acknowledging her, using the time to study my granddaughter's face. At 19, she should have been radiant with youth and possibility. Instead, she looked hollowed out, fragile in a way that made my chest tighten despite my carefully constructed walls. Hello, Aurora. My voice was neutral, giving nothing away. I've been looking for you for weeks. Mom said you'd lost your mind, that you'd run away because you couldn't handle Grandpa Richard being gone. But this, she gestured at the cottage behind me, at the women rolling up their yoga mats, at the obvious signs of a life being lived fully. This doesn't look like someone who's lost her mind. Louise approached, her movements protective. At 71, she'd become the fierce guardian of our small community, the one who vetted newcomers and sent away anyone who brought drama or negativity to our sanctuary. Violet? Louise's tone was carefully neutral. Everything all right? This is my granddaughter, Aurora. I introduced them formally, watching Louise's face for recognition. I'd told the group about my family, about the dinner that had catalyzed my escape. They knew enough to be cautious. The one who looked uncomfortable at the dinner? Louise's voice carried a note of assessment. Aurora's head snapped up. You told them about that? I told them about a family who decided I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. I told them about children who planned to warehouse their mother without consulting her. I told them about a granddaughter who said nothing while it happened. The words hit their mark. Aurora flinched, tears spilling over. I was 19, Grandma. I didn't know how to stop them. I didn't even understand what was really happening until afterward. Afterward? After you disappeared. After they couldn't find you. After Uncle William's business started failing because his emergency funding vanished. After Uncle Kenneth's mortgage payment bounced because his safety net was gone. Aurora's voice grew stronger, angrier. After Mom realized she couldn't access your accounts to help you anymore. The other women had finished packing their equipment, but I could feel them lingering, protective and curious. Donna caught my eye and mouthed, "Want us to stay?" I shook my head slightly. This was a conversation I needed to have alone, but knowing they were nearby gave me strength. "Walk with me," I told Aurora, leading her toward the path that wound along the cliffs. We walked in silence for several minutes, the ocean crashing against the rocks below us. Aurora struggled to keep up with my pace. 3 months of daily hikes had made me stronger than I'd been in years. "They're saying you stole from them," she said finally. I stopped walking. "Stole what exactly?" "The house money. Uncle William says you promised him you'd help with his business expansion. Uncle Kenneth says you were going to co-sign for his new car. Mom says you were supposed to add her to your bank accounts in case of emergencies." The audacity took my breath away. "And what do you think?" Aurora was quiet for a long moment. "I think they're scared. I think they built their lives assuming you'd always be there to catch them when they fell. I think they never bothered to ask what you wanted because they assumed you'd want what they wanted." Her honesty surprised me. "And you? What do you want from me?" "I want to understand. I want to know if you can ever forgive me for not speaking up. I want—" Her voice broke. "I want my grandmother back." We'd reached a bench carved into the cliff top, a memorial to some long-dead fisherman. I sat down heavily, suddenly feeling every one of my 73 years. "Tell me what's really happening at home." Aurora sat beside me, keeping careful distance. "Uncle William's construction company is hemorrhaging money. He'd been using the equity in your house as collateral for loans, assuming he'd inherit it eventually. When you sold it, the bank called in his debt." I felt a flicker of satisfaction. William had always been careless with money, counting on family resources to cover his mistakes. And Kenneth? His wife left him. Apparently, she married him partly because she thought he came from money. Your money. When she realized there wasn't going to be an inheritance, she decided he wasn't worth the trouble. Nancy's departure didn't surprise me. She'd always been calculating, her affection conditional on benefit. "What about Betsy?" Aurora's face darkened. "She's furious. She keeps saying you've ruined everything, that you're being selfish and cruel. She hired a private investigator to find you. And I told him I'd never heard of this place." Aurora's smile was slight but genuine. "I lied to protect you. Does that count for anything?" It did count for something, though I wasn't ready to admit it yet. "Why are you here, Aurora?" "Really?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I've been thinking about that dinner every night for 3 months. Because I realized that in 19 years, I'd never once seen you do something just for yourself. Because when Mom talks about you now, she sounds like she's talking about a possession that got stolen, not a person who made a choice. And because I want to know what it looks like when a woman chooses herself. I want to know if it's possible to build a life that's actually yours." The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. "What do you know about my life now?" I asked. "Only what I can see. You look healthier than you have in years. You seem peaceful, happy even." She gestured toward the cottage. "Those women, they care about you. Really care, not the way family cares because they have to. They're my chosen family. Women who understand that sometimes love means letting go of people who've forgotten how to love you back. Is that what you did? Let us go?" The question was so direct, so vulnerable, that I had to look away. I let go of the version of myself that accepted being diminished. I let go of the idea that my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. I let go of the obligation to sacrifice my dignity for the comfort of people who'd already decided I was disposable. But did you let go of us? I studied Aurora's face. Young, earnest, genuinely seeking understanding rather than demanding forgiveness. She looked more like her father in this moment than like Betsy, and I remembered the man who'd been grateful for my help raising his daughter after his divorce. I let go of the family that existed in my house 3 months ago. The question is whether you're still part of that family or whether you're ready to become something else. What do you mean? I mean that if you want a relationship with me, it has to be on equal terms. Not grandmother and granddaughter, with all the obligations and assumptions that come with those roles. Just two women who choose to care about each other because we want to, not because we have to. Aurora nodded slowly. What would that look like? It would look like honesty. No reporting back to your mother about my life. No trying to mediate between me and the rest of the family. No attempts to guilt me into coming back or forgiving people who haven't earned it. And in return? In return, you get to know the person I really am. Not just the role I played for 40 years. You get invited into a life that's built on mutual respect and genuine affection. You get to see what it looks like when women support each other's choices instead of trying to control them. I paused, watching a fishing boat navigate the swells below us. But you have to choose, Aurora. You can't have both. You can't be part of their campaign to bring me back and part of my new life. The two things are incompatible. What if I choose you and they cut me off? Then you'll learn what I learned. That people who love you conditionally don't actually love you at all. And you'll also learn that chosen family can be stronger than blood family when it's built on the right foundation. Aurora was crying again, but these tears seemed different, cleaner somehow, like she was washing away old assumptions rather than grieving new losses. I don't want to go back to school and pretend everything is normal. I don't want to watch Mom plan your life like you're a problem to be solved. I don't want to be part of a family that thinks love means control. Then don't be. Can I stay here for a few days? Just to see what this life looks like? I looked at my granddaughter, this young woman who'd driven hours to find me, who'd lied to protect me, who was brave enough to ask hard questions and consider difficult answers. You can stay, I said finally, but not as my granddaughter coming to visit. As Aurora, a young woman figuring out who she wants to become. Her smile was radiant. I'd like that very much. As we walked back toward the cottage, I realized that for the first time in 3 months, I felt something other than anger toward my family. Not forgiveness. That would require them to acknowledge what they'd done wrong. But hope, perhaps, that something worth saving could grow from the ashes of what we'd lost. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my cottage, arranging fresh roses from my garden in a vase my grandmother had given me for my wedding. Through the window, I could see Aurora leading a group of women through their morning Tai Chi routine on the beach, her movements fluid and confident. At 20, she'd found something I'd taken 73 years to discover: the courage to live authentically, regardless of others' expectations. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. 3 weeks after her arrival, Aurora had called Betsy to formally announce she was taking a gap year to find herself. The screaming match that followed, conducted over speakerphone while Aurora sat calmly at my kitchen table, had been both painful and liberating. Betsy's threats, her tears, her attempts at guilt and manipulation had all bounced off the young woman who'd finally learned to recognize love from control. "You're throwing your life away for a bitter old woman," Betsy had shrieked. "I'm building my life with a wise woman who taught me what self-respect looks like," Aurora had replied, her voice steady as granite. That had been the last conversation between mother and daughter. Now Aurora was officially my business partner in what had become Seaside Sanctuary, a wellness retreat for women over 50 who were navigating major life transitions. What had started as informal gatherings of Louise's walking group had evolved into something none of us had planned, but all of us had needed. A place where women could come to rebuild themselves after divorce, death, estrangement, or simply the recognition that they'd been living someone else's life. The doorbell rang, interrupting my preparations for the evening session. I wasn't expecting anyone. Our next group of participants wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, but I'd learned to welcome unexpected visitors. They often brought the most interesting stories. I opened the door to find a woman I didn't recognize, though something about her features seemed familiar. She was younger than our usual participants, perhaps in her early 40s, with dark hair streaked with premature silver and the haunted look of someone who'd been crying for days. "Are you Violet Evans?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am. Can I help you?" "I'm Anna Whitmire. I was William's wife. Before Betsy, I mean. We divorced when Tommy was 12. My stomach dropped. Anna had been a sweet girl when William married her fresh out of college. Their divorce had been ugly, with William claiming she was unstable, demanding full custody of their son. I'd believed him then, sided with him, even testified on his behalf about Anna's supposed erratic behavior. It was one of the decisions from my old life that haunted me most. "Anna." I stepped back, gesturing for her to come inside. "I never expected to see you again." She followed me into the living room, her movements careful and deliberate. "I heard about what you did, about how you left them, about William's business failing." She paused, studying my face. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For destroying him the way he destroyed me." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I gestured for her to sit, buying myself time to process this unexpected confrontation with my past. "Tell me what happened," I said finally. Anna's story poured out in fragments, 20 years of suppressed rage and pain finally finding voice. How William had systematically isolated her from friends and family during their marriage. How he'd convinced everyone, including me, that her depression after their son's birth was actually a mental breakdown. How he'd used my testimony about her instability to gain full custody and minimize his financial obligations. "I lost everything," she said, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "My son, my reputation, my family's support. Even you believed his lies." The accusation hit its mark. I had believed William's version of events, had supported his claims that Anna was unfit. I'd been so focused on protecting my son and grandson that I'd never questioned whether the woman being destroyed in court deserved protection too. "I owe you an apology," I said quietly. "A profound one. I should have listened to your side. I should have questioned his narrative. I should have recognized the signs of what he was doing to you." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Do you mean that?" "I mean it completely. I was wrong to support him without hearing you. I was wrong to prioritize my loyalty to him over justice for you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decades-old wounds filling the space between us. "What happened to Tommy?" I asked eventually. Anna's face crumpled. "He's 32 now. William turned him against me so thoroughly that we haven't spoken in 15 years. He won't even acknowledge my existence. As far as Tommy knows, his mother abandoned him because she couldn't handle being a parent." My chest ached with the enormity of the damage William had caused, not just to Anna, but to his own son, who'd grown up believing his mother was unstable and unloving. "Is that why you're here? To tell me what William did?" "Partly, but also because I heard about this place, about what you're doing here, about how you help women rebuild their lives after their families destroy them." Anna's voice was tentative, hopeful. "I was wondering if there might be room for someone like me." Before I could answer, the back door opened and Aurora appeared, her cheeks flushed from exercise, her hair escaping its ponytail. She stopped short when she saw Anna, her expression shifting to protective alertness. "Grandma Violet? Everything okay?" "Aurora. This is Anna. She was married to my son William many years ago." Aurora's expression sharpened. She'd heard enough stories from the other women to recognize the signs of an abuse survivor, someone still carrying wounds from battles fought long ago. "Would you like some tea?" Aurora asked Anna gently. "We were just about to start our evening session with the current retreat participants. You're welcome to observe if you'd like." Anna looked confused. "Evening session? We call it Truth Circle," I explained. "It's where women share their stories without judgment, without being asked to forgive people who haven't earned it, without being told to move on or let it go. It's where we practice believing each other, even when the stories are ugly, especially when the stories are ugly." An hour later, Anna sat in our circle of 12 women, her voice steady as she told her story to an audience that believed every word. Around her, women nodded with recognition, not because their stories were identical, but because they recognized the patterns of manipulation, the systematic erosion of self-worth, the isolation that made victims question their own reality. When Anna finished, Louise spoke first. "You survived. That took incredible strength. You protected your truth even when everyone else chose to believe lies," added Donna. "You're here now, ready to rebuild," said Maxine. "That's what matters." As the circle concluded and the women dispersed to their rooms or homes, Anna lingered. "I don't understand," she said. "Why aren't you angry that I'm here? I came to confront the woman who helped destroy my life, and instead you're welcoming me?" "Because," I said, settling into my grandmother's rocking chair, "I learned something important when I left my old life behind. The woman who testified against you wasn't the real me. She was the version of myself I'd created to keep peace in my family. She was the woman who prioritized loyalty over justice, who chose comfort over truth." I paused, watching the ocean through my window. When I finally chose to see clearly, I had to confront every decision I'd made from that place of willful blindness, including what I'd done to you. And now? Now I try to live as the woman I actually am, not the woman my family needed me to be. That woman believes you. That woman recognizes that William is capable of exactly the kind of systematic cruelty you described. That woman wants to help you heal, if you'll let her. Anna was crying again, but these tears seemed different, lighter somehow, as if she were releasing weight she'd carried for decades. "There's something else," she said, "about why I really came here." I waited. "Tommy's getting divorced. His wife is leaving him, and she's fighting for custody of their daughters. The things she's saying about him, they sound exactly like the things I used to say about his father." My blood chilled. "He's repeating the pattern." "I think so. And I think his daughters might end up where I was, cut off, discredited, powerless." Anna's voice was steady now, determined. "I can't save my relationship with my son, but maybe I can save my granddaughters from growing up thinking their mother abandoned them. What do you need?" "I need to be strong enough to testify for her. I need to be credible, stable, convincing. I need to be the woman who can stand up in court and explain exactly how this pattern works, how it destroys families, how it perpetuates itself across generations." I looked at Anna, really looked at her for the first time in 20 years. Beneath the pain and the premature aging and the defensive hunching of her shoulders, I could see the strong woman she'd been before William broke her spirit. "How long can you stay?" I asked. "As long as it takes." Aurora appeared in the doorway, carrying 3 cups of tea on my grandmother's silver tray. "The guest room is ready," she said to Anna. "And I think you should know. We specialize in helping women find their voices again, especially when they need to use them in court." As the 3 of us sat together, planning Anna's healing and her testimony, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 6 months since I'd left my old life, a sense of purpose that went beyond my own healing. Anna represented every woman I'd failed to protect during my years of willful blindness. Helping her meant continuing to become the person I should have been all along. Outside, the ocean whispered its eternal promises of tides that turned, of shores that endured, of storms that passed. But tonight, it also whispered something new, that redemption wasn't about being forgiven by people who'd wronged you, but about becoming strong enough to protect others from the harm you'd once allowed. For the first time since that terrible dinner 8 months ago, I felt completely, authentically myself, and it felt like coming home.